When a young Latina lawyer stood up to defend her mother, the judge laughed at her, but what happened next shook the entire courtroom. The courthouse in downtown San Antonio buzzed with the low hum of lawyers, defendants, and families waiting nervously for their cases to be called. Inside, the walls smelled faintly of old wood polish and the marble floors echoed with every hurried step. Maria Alvarez sat on the hard wooden bench, hands clasped tightly around her rosary, eyes cast downward. She was a proud Latina mother, in her late 50s, the kind of woman who worked 2 jobs for decades to give her daughter the opportunities she herself never had. But now, instead of celebrating her hard-earned peace, she was staring down the terrifying weight of a criminal charge. The accusation was absurd: fraud and theft from her employer, a local grocery chain. Maria had spent 20 years stocking shelves, mopping aisles, and serving customers with a tired but genuine smile. And now the company claimed she had stolen from them, based on nothing more than a bookkeeping error. Maria's appointed public defender had been cold and dismissive, telling her, "These cases don't go well. Best to take a plea deal and move on." But Maria refused to admit to something she didn't do. That's when her daughter, Isabella Alvarez, stepped in. At just 26, Isabella was fresh out of law school, bright, ambitious, and fiercely protective of her family. She had passed the Texas bar only months earlier, working late nights at a small immigration rights nonprofit. She wasn't wealthy, she didn't have big firm resources, but she had something the others didn't: a fire in her heart and a cause worth fighting for. When Isabella walked into the courthouse that morning, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun and her suit slightly too big for her petite frame. Heads turned. She didn't carry the arrogance of seasoned attorneys, but rather the determination of someone with everything to prove. At her side, Maria whispered anxiously, "Mija, are you sure about this? You're so young. And this judge, he doesn't like people like us." Isabella squeezed her mother's hand. "Mama, trust me. You raised me to never back down from what's right. Today I'm your lawyer, and I will not let them destroy you." When their case was finally called, Judge Henry Wallace leaned back in his chair and peered down at them. He was an older white man with a reputation for being impatient, dismissive, and at times openly prejudiced toward minorities in his courtroom. He wore his robe like armor, his voice dripping with condescension. Case number 24819, State of Texas versus Maria Alvarez, the bailiff announced. Judge Wallace's eyes narrowed as Isabella stood and declared, "Your Honor, Isabella Alvarez, counsel for the defense. I am representing my mother in this matter." The courtroom erupted in whispers. A young Latina woman, barely older than a college student, standing against the state, representing her own mother? The judge's lips curled into a smirk. He let out a booming laugh that echoed across the courtroom. "Miss Alvarez," he said mockingly, "this isn't a classroom debate club. Do you even know where you are? This is a real court, not some practice exam." The prosecutor, a smug man named Richard Harlan, chuckled along with the judge. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Perhaps Miss Alvarez should sit down before embarrassing herself. Or worse, her client." Maria's face burned with shame. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into the bench and never be seen again. But Isabella stood taller, her voice steady even as her hands trembled slightly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I am a licensed attorney in the state of Texas. I have every right to represent my client, regardless of my age or relation to her." The judge arched an eyebrow. "You're really going to stand there and pretend you can handle this? This is a felony fraud case. Do you even know the sentencing guidelines?" "Yes, Your Honor," Isabella replied firmly. "And I also know that my mother is innocent." The laughter faded. The room grew quiet. For the first time, the judge studied Isabella closely, as if realizing she wasn't going to back down. He sighed and shook his head. "Fine. If you insist on walking into the fire, don't cry when you get burned. We'll proceed." Maria looked up at her daughter, pride swelling in her chest despite the fear in her heart. Isabella wasn't just defending her. She was defending every Latina mother who had been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. But neither of them could have imagined what was about to unfold, because as the trial began, secrets hidden deep within the company's files, and even within the court itself, would come to light. And the laughter that once filled the room would soon turn into gasps of shock. The incredible was about to happen. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as the clerk read the charges. Fraud, theft, and embezzlement. Words that seemed so heavy, so cold, they didn't feel like they belonged to Maria Alvarez at all. She was no thief. She was a mother, a worker, a woman who gave her life to a company that now treated her like a criminal. Isabella straightened her blazer and took a deep breath. She knew this was no ordinary trial. Every eye was on her, some skeptical, some pitying, some outright hostile. The prosecutor, Richard Harlan, carried himself with the swagger of a man who had won dozens of these cases. He looked at Isabella, like she was a child who had wandered into the wrong room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Harlan began, rising with theatrical confidence, "this is a simple case. The defendant, Maria Alvarez, stole from her employer. Over the course of several months, funds went missing, and the only person with access was her. The evidence will show she betrayed the trust of the company that gave her work. This is theft, plain and simple." He walked slowly in front of the jury box, his voice dripping with disdain. "And while her daughter may be young and eager, let's not mistake inexperience for innocence. The facts will speak for themselves." Isabella clenched her fists under the table. She could feel the judge's eyes on her, waiting for her to falter, waiting for her to stumble. But when it was her turn, she stood tall, her voice carrying across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Isabella Alvarez, and I have the honor of representing my mother today. What the prosecution just told you is a story, but it is not the truth. The truth is that Maria Alvarez is a hard-working woman who gave 20 years of her life to that grocery store. The truth is that the company is using her as a scapegoat to cover up its own mistakes. And the truth is that by the end of this trial, you will see that my mother is not a thief, but a victim of injustice." She let her words hang in the air. Some jurors nodded slightly, others remained guarded. But Isabella could feel the shift. She wasn't here to play defense, she was here to fight. The judge cleared his throat impatiently. "Very well, counsel. Let's move to the evidence." The prosecution wasted no time presenting what they called proof. A series of spreadsheets showing discrepancies in the store's accounts. A surveillance photo of Maria near the cash office. A statement from a manager claiming she had suspicious behavior. "Suspicious behavior?" Isabella repeated during cross-examination, her eyebrows raised. "Mr. Jenkins, can you clarify what you mean by that?" The manager shifted uncomfortably on the stand. "Well, she was always in the back room. Always. Around the money." Isabella leaned in, her voice sharp but calm. "She was the cleaning staff supervisor, correct?" "Yes." "And wasn't it her job to clean the back rooms after hours, including the cash office?" The man stammered. "Well, yes, but—" "No further questions," Isabella said, letting the jurors see how flimsy his accusation really was. The prosecutor scowled, but Isabella wasn't finished. When the spreadsheets were introduced, she stood confidently. "Your Honor, we would like to request the original financial logs, not just these prepared summaries provided by the company." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you questioning the integrity of the company's internal audit, Ms. Alvarez?" "Yes, Your Honor," Isabella said firmly. "Because so far all we've seen is convenient paperwork that points to my mother, with no independent verification. My client deserves more than that." The judge sighed, clearly annoyed. "Motion denied. We'll proceed with the evidence as submitted." A ripple of disapproval moved through the courtroom. Isabella felt her jaw tighten. It was clear. The judge wasn't going to make this easy for her. During recess, Maria looked at her daughter with worried eyes. "Mija, he's against us, I can feel it. The judge, the prosecutor, they don't believe me." Isabella sat beside her mother, holding her hands tightly. "Mama, listen to me. They think they can intimidate us. They think I'm too young, too inexperienced. But they're wrong. I know there's something they're hiding, and I'm going to find it." Do you trust me?" Maria's eyes watered as she nodded. "With my life." When court resumed, the prosecution called their star witness, the regional manager of the grocery chain, a man in a sharp suit who carried himself like his word was law. "Mr. Reynolds," Harlan began, "as the regional manager, did you discover the theft?" "Yes," Reynolds said confidently. The discrepancies pointed directly to Maria Alvarez. She had both access and opportunity. In my professional opinion, she's guilty. Isabella rose slowly, every eye on her. This was her chance to strike. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "you say you discovered the theft. Did you personally conduct the audit?" "No. Our accounting department did." "So you're not an accountant?" "No. And yet, you're giving this jury your professional opinion about financial records?" The manager's confidence wavered. "Well, yes, based on the reports given to me." "Reports prepared by your own company. A company currently under investigation for tax irregularities. Isn't that correct?" The courtroom gasped. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Objection, irrelevant." Isabella's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "Your Honor, it speaks directly to credibility. If the company itself is under investigation, then its internal reports cannot be trusted at face value." The judge scowled, clearly irritated, that Isabella had hit a nerve. Sustained in part, "The jury will disregard the mention of investigations. Move on, Ms. Alvarez." But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Doubt had been planted. When the witness stepped down, Isabella caught the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't as confident as he had been when he first walked in. Something was there, something hidden. That night, as Isabella sat at her desk surrounded by case files and coffee cups, she went through every page of the discovery documents. Most were routine, repetitive, until she found a single memo buried deep in the pile. It was from the company's accounting department, dated 3 weeks before Maria's arrest. The memo mentioned internal misallocations and instructed managers to ensure accountability falls to staff level to avoid escalation. Isabella's hands trembled as she read it again. This was the smoking gun. The company was setting up low-level employees, like her mother, to take the blame for financial irregularities higher up the chain. The next morning, Isabella walked into the courtroom with a new fire in her eyes. The prosecutor looked smug. The judge looked tired. But Isabella? She looked unstoppable, because she now had the first piece of proof that could turn the entire case upside down, and soon, the laughter and mockery would vanish completely. The incredible was just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with the same cynical energy when the third day of trial began. Reporters had started trickling in, drawn by the unusual story of a young Latina lawyer defending her own mother. Most of them assumed it would be a short-lived spectacle ending in conviction. But Isabella carried herself differently that morning. She wasn't just defending her mother anymore. She was about to put the entire company, and its carefully hidden corruption, on trial. The prosecutor, Richard Harlan, smirked as he shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, today we'll finish presenting the state's case, and frankly, I expect this won't take long. The evidence is overwhelming." Isabella didn't flinch. She rose with the quiet confidence of someone who knew a storm was about to hit. "Your Honor, before the prosecution proceeds, the defense would like to submit new evidence into the record." Judge Wallace frowned. "New evidence? At this stage? What are you playing at, Miss Alvarez?" Isabella held up the memo she had discovered. "Last night, while reviewing discovery documents provided by the prosecution, I found this internal memo from the company's accounting department. It explicitly refers to internal misallocations and instructs managers to ensure accountability falls on staff-level employees. This directly suggests that my client was made a scapegoat for corporate misconduct." The courtroom erupted in gasps. The jurors leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Even the reporters' pens flew furiously across their notepads. Thorough. Prosecutor jumped to his feet, red-faced. "Objection. That memo is out of context and irrelevant." Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady but powerful. "Out of context? Irrelevant? This is the context. This is the truth. My client isn't a thief. She's a pawn in a much larger scheme, and the company wants to throw her under the bus to save itself." The judge banged his gavel. "Order in the court." His eyes narrowed at Isabella. "I'll allow the document into evidence, but I warn you, Ms. Alvarez, if this turns into a fishing expedition, I'll shut it down." Isabella didn't blink. "I understand, Your Honor, but I promise you this is no fishing expedition. This is the beginning of the truth." She turned to the jury and let the silence stretch before speaking again. "My mother's so-called suspicious behavior? It was her doing her job. The missing funds? They were misallocated internally, not stolen. And the person responsible is not sitting at this defense table. They're hiding behind their title and their power." The prosecutor sneered. "Bold words, counselor. Do you have proof?" Isabella smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I intend to show." Cross-examination. Bombshell. Later that morning, Isabella called Mr. Reynolds, the regional manager, back to the stand. He walked up with visible irritation, clearly not expecting to be questioned again. "Mr. Reynolds?" Isabella began, holding up the memo. "Do you recognize this document?" He adjusted his tie. "It looks like a company memo, yes. And it came from your accounting department, correct?" "Yes." "Can you explain why it instructs managers to ensure accountability falls to staff level?" Reynolds shifted in his chair. "That's just corporate language. It means employees should take responsibility for their mistakes." Isabella's voice grew sharper. "Mistakes? Or crimes?" The manager's face flushed. "Objection!" the prosecutor barked. Argumentative, but Isabella pressed on. "Isn't it true, Mr. Reynolds, that your company has been under quiet federal review for financial irregularities? Isn't it true that rather than expose executives, you pinned the blame on employees like my mother?" The manager's eyes darted nervously. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do." Isabella flipped through her folder. "Because I have emails you sent, where you specifically mention my mother's name as an acceptable loss if this ever went to court." The entire courtroom froze. Gasps filled the air. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned. The prosecutor shouted, "Objection! Your Honor, the defense is introducing materials not previously disclosed." Isabella held up the email printout. "These were part of the discovery package your office gave me, Mr. Harlan. Perhaps you didn't read them as closely as you should have." The judge motioned for the bailiff to collect the documents. His expression was no longer mocking. It was calculating, cautious. "Proceed, Ms. Alvarez," Reynolds stammered, sweat beading at his temple. That's not what I meant. It was just a phrase." "A phrase," Isabella repeated, her voice slicing through the silence. "You called my mother an acceptable loss. A woman who scrubbed your store floors for 2 decades. A grandmother, a human being. To you, she was disposable. To me, she is everything. And today this jury will see exactly what kind of corruption you're hiding." The jury sat stunned. The reporters scribbled like mad. And for the first time, Judge Wallace didn't interrupt her. A shift in the courtroom. At recess, Maria clutched her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Mija, you're incredible. I can't believe you found that." Isabella smiled gently. "We're not finished yet, Mama, but they can't ignore us now." Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's corner, Harlan hissed at Reynolds. "Why didn't you tell me about those emails?" Reynolds whispered back, panicked. "I thought they were buried in the files. No one was supposed to notice." But Isabella had noticed. And now, the jury couldn't unhear it. The judge loses control. When court resumed, Isabella rose again. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, I move to subpoena the company's full unredacted financial records." The prosecutor jumped up. "This is absurd." "Fishing expedition, Your Honor." The judge hesitated. The same judge who had laughed at Isabella, who had dismissed her as a rookie. His eyes flickered to the jury, who now looked suspicious of the prosecution, not the defense. "Motion granted," he said reluctantly. The company will produce the requested records. Gasps echoed again. Isabella's pulse quickened. She had just cracked the wall wide open. The incredible happens. That afternoon, as everyone scrambled, a courier delivered the subpoenaed documents, boxes of ledgers, audits, and internal communications. Isabella dove into them with the intensity of someone who knew salvation lay between those pages. And then she found it. A signed directive from none other than Reynolds himself, instructing the accounting department to reassign financial discrepancies to lower staff to minimize corporate liability. She stood and addressed the court. Her voice rang with unshakable conviction. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense has just discovered proof. Proof that this entire case is built on lies. My client did not steal a dime. The real fraud is sitting right there at the prosecution's table, every head turned. Reynolds looked pale, his lips quivering. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. The judge slammed his gavel. Order, order! But it was too late. The courtroom had exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the phones. Jurors whispered frantically. Maria buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed. And Isabella, standing at the center of it all, knew she had just done what nobody thought possible. She had turned the entire trial upside down, and the incredible was only just beginning. The courtroom erupted into a storm of noise. Jurors leaned toward one another in hurried whispers. Reporters typed furiously, and even the gallery, packed with curious onlookers, murmured so loudly that the bailiff had to shout for silence. Judge Wallace slammed his gavel again and again, his face flushed with anger. Order! This court will have order! Finally, the noise subsided. The judge glared at Isabella. Ms. Alvarez, this is highly irregular. You can't just throw accusations at the prosecution's witnesses without proper foundation. But Isabella didn't shrink. She stood taller, her voice calm but cutting. Your Honor, the foundation is right here. She held up the signed directive. This isn't an accusation, it's evidence. Evidence that the company deliberately framed my mother to shield itself from liability. The judge took the document, flipping through it quickly. His expression, usually smug and dismissive, wavered for the first time. He handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the prosecutor. Richard Harlan's face drained of color as he scanned the pages. This could mean anything, he sputtered. Corporate jargon. It doesn't prove theft didn't occur. Isabella stepped forward, locking eyes with him. Then why does it specifically mention my mother's name, Mr. Harlan? Why does it call her, and I quote, an acceptable loss to protect the company? Do you call that corporate jargon or a cover-up? The jury gasped audibly. Maria sat frozen at the defense table, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had prayed for justice, but never imagined her daughter would expose the truth so boldly, so brilliantly. The prosecutor on the defense of Harlan tried to recover, his voice rising. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a desperate attempt to deflect from the charges. The defendant was caught near the cash office. Funds are missing. These are facts, not theories. Isabella cut in before the judge could rule. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to cross-examine the witness again, this time with the company's full financial records. Judge Wallace pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly irritated. This court is not a circus, Ms. Alvarez, but given the gravity of these documents, I'll allow limited questioning. Harlan's jaw dropped. Your Honor. Enough, Mr. Harlan, Wallace barked. Sit down. It was a turning point. The same judge who had mocked Isabella days earlier was now giving her room to fight. Exposing the scheme, Isabella called Reynolds back to the stand. The regional manager looked like a man walking to the gallows. His once confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps. Mr. Reynolds, Isabella began, holding up the directive. This is your signature, correct? Reynolds swallowed hard. Yes. And this memo instructs your accountants to shift financial discrepancies onto lower-level employees, correct? He fidgeted. It was phrased poorly. Yes or no, Mr. Reynolds? The silence stretched. Finally, he muttered, yes. The jury collectively leaned back, stunned. Isabella pressed on. Why did you select my mother as the target? Reynolds shook his head. I didn't. Isabella slammed her hand lightly on the podium. Isn't it true that Maria Alvarez was chosen because she lacked resources to defend herself? Because she was an immigrant woman with no power and no money? Isn't it true you believed she'd simply take a plea deal and disappear quietly? The prosecutor objected loudly, but the judge allowed the question. Reynolds stammered, sweat dripping down his forehead. I don't know. I didn't make those decisions. Isabella leaned in, her voice ablaze. You signed the memo, Mr. Reynolds. You made the decisions and now you're under oath. Did you or did you not target my mother to protect your company? The man broke. His shoulders slumped. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, we did. The courtroom exploded again. The jury gasped, the gallery roared, and even the reporters looked stunned. The judge's gavel thundered. Order! Order in the court! But no amount of banging could erase what had just been said. Cracks in the system during recess, the courthouse corridors buzzed like a hive. News cameras swarmed outside, eager to report on the stunning revelation. A regional manager admitting, under oath, that a grocery chain framed one of its own employees. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutor was red-faced, whispering heatedly with Reynolds. The once smug man now looked broken, his career and freedom hanging by a thread. Maria sat quietly beside Isabella, clutching her daughter's hand. Mija, you've done more than defend me. You've defended everyone like me. Isabella smiled, through her exhaustion. Mama, we're not finished yet. They'll fight harder now that they're cornered. But we have the truth. And the truth is stronger than all of them. Judge Wallace's shift. When court reconvened, Judge Wallace's demeanor had shifted noticeably. He no longer looked at Isabella with ridicule. His eyes were sharper, more cautious, almost respectful. Ms. Alvarez, he said slowly, you've presented evidence that raises serious concerns about the credibility of the prosecution's case. I am considering sanctions against the witness and potentially the prosecution for failing to disclose this material properly. Harlan jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. The defense is twisting documents and confusing the jury. But the judge cut him off sharply. Sit down, Mr. Harlan, or I'll hold you in contempt. The gallery gasped again. The same judge who had laughed at Isabella was now threatening the prosecutor. The jury reacts. The jurors whispered among themselves, their expressions no longer neutral. Some looked angry, others disgusted, but none of them looked convinced of Maria's guilt anymore. Isabella could feel the tide turning. She seized the moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said during her next statement, my mother is not on trial anymore. What's on trial is corruption, abuse of power, a system that thought it could crush a woman because she was small, quiet, and Latina. But today we've shown them wrong. Today we've shown that truth can speak louder than lies. Her words hit like lightning. The prosecutor's last stand backed into a corner. Harlan tried one final gambit. He called a surprise witness. Another, store employee who claimed to have seen Maria lingering suspiciously near the cash office. But Isabella was ready. Mr. Lopez, she began calmly. You say you saw my mother near the cash office? Yes. Do you recall the date? He hesitated. It was late March. Isabella flipped through her notes. Interesting. Because the company records show she was on vacation in Mexico that week visiting her sick sister. Are you saying she was in two places at once? The witness stammered. I must have the date wrong. Or, Isabella said, her voice sharp, you were pressured to testify against her. The man's silence said more than words ever could. The jury's eyes widened, the gallery whispered again, and the prosecutor's last defense crumbled to dust. The incredible moment. By the end of the day, the courtroom no longer felt like a trial. It felt like a reckoning. Maria Alvarez, once painted as a criminal, now sat as a symbol of injustice, exposed. Isabella, once mocked for her youth, now commanded the courtroom with fire and brilliance, and Judge Wallace, who had laughed at her on day one, now leaned forward with something that looked like admiration. "Court will recess until tomorrow," he declared, his voice heavy. "But I'll say this much. This case is no longer what it was when it began. Counsel, prepare yourselves." As the gavel fell, reporters swarmed the hallways, shouting questions. Maria and Isabella walked out hand in hand, surrounded by flashing cameras. And for the first time in weeks, Maria felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Because her daughter had just done the impossible. The incredible had happened. But tomorrow, the verdict would decide everything. The fourth morning of trial arrived like a storm hanging over the courthouse. The steps outside were swarmed, with reporters, cameras flashing as Maria and Isabella approached. Strangers lined the sidewalks, some holding signs of support for Maria, others simply curious to witness history. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Every seat in the gallery was filled. The jury filed in with stern faces, each carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. Lies unraveled, a corporation exposed, and a young Latina attorney dismantling the prosecution piece by piece. Judge Wallace entered the courtroom slower than usual, his expression unreadable. Gone was the smugness that had once marked his interactions with Isabella. He looked almost humbled. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Isabella reached for her mother's hand beneath the table, squeezing it gently. Maria whispered, "No matter what happens, mija, I am proud of you." Isabella whispered back, "We're not leaving here defeated, Mama. Not today." Closing arguments. The prosecutor, Richard Harlan, stood first. His voice carried the sharp edge of desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't be distracted by theatrics. The facts remain. Funds went missing. The defendant had access. You must focus on the evidence, not conspiracy theories spun by a rookie attorney." His words rang hollow. Even as he spoke, jurors glanced at one another with skepticism. The weight of the signed memos and Reynolds' confession still hung in the air. Then it was Isabella's turn. She rose slowly, walking toward the jury with quiet confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I won't waste your time with rehearsed lines. You've seen the truth with your own eyes. You heard a regional manager admit under oath that my mother was deliberately targeted. You saw documents proving the company instructed its staff to shift blame onto powerless employees. And you watched as witness after witness crumbled under the light of the truth." She paused, her voice softening. "My mother isn't just my client. She is a woman who worked 2 jobs for 20 years to give me the chance to stand here before you today. She taught me that dignity matters more than money, that integrity is worth more than power. And now I ask you to honor that truth, to give her back the life she never should have lost." She stepped closer to the jury box, her voice steady. "You don't just hold Maria Alvarez's fate in your hands. You hold the message that every hardworking person in this country deserves, that justice cannot be bought, and the powerless are not disposable. Find her innocent, because she is innocent." When she sat down, the courtroom was silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just the echo of her words hanging in the air. The jury deliberates. The jury filed out, leaving the room buzzing with tension. Maria leaned against Isabella, whispering prayers under her breath. Isabella kept her eyes on the door, her heart pounding. Minutes stretched into hours. Reporters outside speculated wildly. Supporters gathered, chanting Maria's name. Inside, Isabella reviewed her notes for the 100th time, though she knew the arguments were over. It was in the jury's hands now. Finally, the bailiff announced, "The jury has reached a verdict." The room went silent. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly as they held the paper. "On the charge of theft, we find the defendant, Maria Alvarez, not guilty." Maria gasped, clutching her chest. The gallery erupted in cheers. Isabella wrapped her arms around her mother, tears streaming freely. The foreperson continued, their voice louder now. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant, Maria Alvarez, not guilty." The cheers grew louder. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Maria sobbed into her daughter's shoulder, whispering, "Gracias a Dios, gracias, mija." Judge Wallace banged his gavel for silence, though even he looked moved. His voice softened as he spoke. Mrs. Alvarez, this court owes you an apology. You were wrongfully accused, and it was only through the diligence and bravery of your daughter that the truth came to light. Ms. Alvarez, your performance in this courtroom has been nothing short of extraordinary. I may not have respected you when this trial began, but I do now. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. But it wasn't just the end of the trial. It was the beginning of something greater. Outside the courthouse, Maria and Isabella were mobbed by cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions. How does it feel to be exonerated? Ms. Alvarez, what's next for you? Do you plan to sue the company for damages? Isabella raised a hand, shielding her mother from the chaos. Today is not about lawsuits or headlines. Today is about justice. My mother is innocent and the truth has prevailed. That's all that matters. But the story was already spreading like wildfire across national news. Young Latina lawyer defends mother, exposes corporate fraud. Social media erupted, hailing Isabella as a hero. Back at home, neighbors gathered outside with flowers and banners. Maria's small kitchen overflowed with friends and family who had prayed for this moment. A private moment. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned, Maria and Isabella sat together at the dining table. The rosary Maria had carried to every hearing lay between them. Mija, Maria said softly, when I first saw that judge laugh at you, I wanted to beg you to stop. I thought you'd be crushed. But you stood taller every time they tried to break you. How did you do it? Isabella smiled through her exhaustion. Because you taught me, Mama. You taught me that no matter how small they make us feel, we are never powerless when we have the truth. Today wasn't just about you. It was about every mother who works her fingers to the bone and deserves respect. Maria took her daughter's hand. I may have raised you, but today, you carried me. I'll never forget it. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their journey settling in. For the first time in months, Maria's shoulders relaxed. In the weeks that followed, the grocery chain found itself under federal investigation. Executives scrambled as documents surfaced, confirming Isabella's arguments. Reynolds resigned in disgrace, facing charges of perjury and fraud. The prosecutor's office faced harsh criticism for its failure to investigate thoroughly. And Isabella? She became something of a symbol. Invitations poured in, from law schools, advocacy groups, even television networks. But she declined most of them, choosing instead to return to her small nonprofit office. When asked why, she simply said, I didn't go into law for fame. I went into law for justice, and there are many more mothers out there who need it. One evening, weeks later, Isabella found her mother sitting quietly in the living room, smiling at an old photo of Isabella in her graduation gown. You know, Maria said softly, when you told that judge you were my lawyer, and he laughed, my heart broke. But then, the incredible happened. Isabella sat beside her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. No, Mama, the incredible didn't just happen. We made it happen, together. And in that quiet, tender moment, they both knew. They had not only won a trial, they had proved that truth, love, and courage could overcome even the strongest walls of injustice.